Hello and welcome back to another webinar update session from the Maths and English team at Sitting Guilds. It's Paul with you today for the recorded version of this month's session. With all of the fallout from COVID over the last sort of 15 or so months, it's quite easy to forget that we're approaching 2 years since the introduction of the reformed functional skills qualifications for first teaching. This month we're therefore going to take a little bit of time to reflect on how those reforms, particularly the rebalancing of functional English and maths to include more overt focus on underpinning skills, has changed approaches to teaching, learning and assessment preparation. Of course, the period since the reformed qualifications went live has been anything but normal, so in a way it's still quite difficult to evaluate them, but nonetheless there are some points that might be useful to explore, and in some cases there might need to be some re-engagement with some of those requirements that we're now hopefully coming towards the end of this period of adapted, disrupted, calculated, teacher assessed, whatever we're calling it this week, approaches to assessment. The usual housekeeping obviously always applies with these webinars in that if you are having any technical issues with GoToWebinar, we always advise you to log out and log in again. That may be useful for future reference if you're listening to any of the live sessions in future. We've settled into a pattern of doing these sessions live 3 times each month with a recorded version available afterwards. It seems to be working, but as always we'd welcome your thoughts on how well this is working for you. You'll always find the recording on the Maths and English Resource Hub web page. But I think also just worth a very quick reminder about the importance of signing up for our email alerts, and especially at the moment making sure that your preferences are up to date. We've had in the last few weeks a number of queries from centres that were seemingly unaware of the last assessment dates for the legacy functional skills qualifications, and there have been various other bits of quite important information that we've used the email alert system to publicise. Also, if you do have any candidates currently going through the tag process for functional skills or for ESOL, we have updated quite a few of those documents in the last sort of couple of weeks, so please do check and ensure that you're working from the very latest versions. And here's your other quick regular reminder that you can always find the latest version of our rolling Q&A document on the Functional Skills Qualification Documents page. Whilst we normally at the end of the live sessions have a little bit of time to take sort of questions, we do also say that you're welcome to email us at any time using pre-employment@sittingguilds.com. So whilst we have been talking about the withdrawal dates for the legacy functional skills qualifications for some time, let's just now reiterate that we are reaching the end of the period before last certification, and indeed the final opportunity to attempt the assessments for legacy functional skills has now passed. The internal assessments could in theory be done up until about the 18th of June, but that activity, as we say, really does need to have been wound up because there is a need to ensure that all EQA activity relating to the legacy qualifications is completed by the end of June. The final certification date is the 31st of July, so literally any results claims for internal assessments, and this includes, crucially, this includes the certification code claims for FS English, the 900, 901, 902, etc. codes, need to be in well before that end date. That 31st of July deadline is a regulatory requirement, so there is really no give on it, so please do make sure you're taking that into account and that your internal processes are doing so likely. As I said a second ago, it is a timely reminder about the importance of making sure that you are signed up for our email alerts. As always, you can do this by following the link marked labelled email updates at the bottom of literally any Sitting Guilds web page. Another point just very quickly to mention is that obviously the legacy functional skills qualifications that are ending are in English and mathematics. The functional skills ICT, the legacy functional skills ICT, it's not legacy because it's not been replaced, is continuing at least for the foreseeable future. So, okay, time for this month's, in case you missed it. You may have seen that we are about to recommission or to commission some new ESOL Skills for Life assignments. So we've been asking for views about possible topics and contexts. If you are familiar with these qualifications, you'll know that we've always provided a choice of assessment titles, so it's possible to select those most likely to engage and interest particular cohorts. There's a link to the survey on this slide. Secondly, you may have seen that Ofsted has published a research review focusing on maths teaching and learning. It is worth a read, even though the focus is very clearly pre-16. There is quite a lot of discussion about distinguishing between what they term declarative, procedural and conditional knowledge, and some interesting perspectives on the role of contextualisation and the extent to which teachers might overuse practice assessments. Again, you'll see the link to the report on this slide. And here's our final, in case you missed it, for this month. We have mentioned this a number of times in recent months, but just to reiterate, the sequencing flexibility that allowed apprentices to pass through Gateway before achieving their Maths and English qualifications has now ended. It could only be applied to endpoint assessments started on or before the 31st of May. However, the study towards an attempt level 2 rule for apprentices requiring only Maths and English qualifications at level 1, if they're working towards a level 2 standard, for example, does remain in place for the time being, but that's also due to end on the 31st of July. A quick update next on the new version of OpenAssess. We are still working to confirm the rollout details for this, including some quite detailed guidance to help you get up and running with it when it does launch, as the look and feel will be a little bit different from the previous version if you worked with that. But in the meantime, here's another reminder that the sample tests in on-screen format are still available from the Functional Skills Qualifications page. You need to click on the Information tab and then select either Level 1 or Level 2. As well as the full-length tests, there is also a navigation test. Really important, particularly as a way of helping to familiarise with the tools used within the maths exams. The samples need to be opened using Surpass a Viewer, but have been built to look like a real Evolve test with all of the same functionality. Again, important to distinguish these from the PDF sample tests that can also be found on the qualification documents page, which we've recently made available with editable answer boxes alongside each question, although they do have the same content. So we're approaching a couple of years since the Functional Skills 2019 reforms. The legacy Maths and English, as we were saying a second ago, having been extended a couple of times, will finally be closing to certification at the end of next month. In the meantime, though, we've had the disruption of COVID, the CAG process last summer, the range of adaptations in place for this year, remote invigilation becoming possible, and the TAG process indeed for those learners who really can't access normal assessments. So it's arguably been harder for practitioners to really get their feet under the table with the new subject content than we might have anticipated when 4748 first opened up to registrations in the autumn of 2019. In a moment, we're going to recap on what some of those reforms involved. We're also, for those who were joining the live session, going to ask some poll questions, but you'll see those questions in a moment. So let's just remind ourselves about how those reforms came about and some of the key drivers for change. I think we're conscious that many of you may have not been involved in delivering the legacy functional skills qualifications, or you might not have been involved during that period whilst the reforms were taking place. So here's a very quick abridged history lesson. If we go back to 2014 or thereabouts, there was quite a lot of chatter and speculation at the time about whether the government would pull the plug on functional skills completely and instead require all maths and English learners in all settings to study GCSE. There were a number of things that caused that position to change, and in 2015 a report was published called Making Maths and English Work for All, which argued the case for keeping, updating and giving more prominence to functional skills. The Education and Training Foundation was then asked to lead a review of functional skills involving employers and a number of other stakeholders. Ministers then signed off the subject content for the revised qualifications in early 2018, whilst Ofqual was asked to design a new regulatory model for these qualifications. There was quite a lot of talk about the need to make functional skills more rigorous, and that's not necessarily harder, but certainly a lot of the thinking at the time was about how enabling functional skills to be talked up as a reliable alternative to GCSE. The new functional skills subject content is quite a lot more detailed than the old subject criteria, although if you have looked at the mapping grids that we put together during the launch of the reforms, you'll see that a lot of that new, in inverted commas, content has always been included within the adult numeracy and literacy core curricula. I think the difference really is more that some of that knowledge and understanding is now being tested directly rather than implicitly. The other big change, of course, was the new invigilation requirements and the tighter controls on invigilation and access to live assessment materials. Again, that was part of this agenda of giving functional skills more kudos and status alongside GCSE. So we're going to ask you some questions. If you were listening to the live versions, you will have had an opportunity to interact with these. So what I'm going to do now is skip directly to the next slide where you can see the questions. So here they are. You're welcome to, if you fancy answering any of these questions or offering us a view on any of these things, you are more than welcome to drop us an email to pre-employment@sittinggirls.com, particularly if you'd like to sort of elaborate on any of these points as well. So that brings us to the close of this month's session. It just remains for me to say thank you again for your attention, and hopefully we'll either interact with you directly during one of the live sessions in July, or indeed you'll be able to catch the recording for the July session. Just remains to say thank you and goodbye.